basically it will keep you eating until you get enough of those amino acids. In other words, there are two parallel tracks, one within our taste system.
Multiple pathways to satiation.
Right, they're totally right. Multiple pathways to satiation, one dependent on taste, one dependent on actual nutrient content. The mouth can only learn taste association. The mouth can't actually learn nutrient content. The gut knows nutrient content. The problem is you take a food that is low in a micronutrient or macronutrient or essential amino acids or essential fatty acids. After all, there are no essential carbohydrates. There are only essential amino acids and essential fatty acids.
Right.
And it will keep you eating, and it will keep the appetite system revving until you get enough of those. Now, here's the issue. If you've ever done this, it's
That's
probably
empty calories.
empty
so to
calories.
speak. Yeah.
But what's
Oh, yeah.
so in some ways, this again is an analog to the whole discussion around pornography, masturbation, and reproduction, right? I'm not saying that reproduction is the be-all, end-all of sexual activity, but in the evolutionary sense, it absolutely is, right? There's no question about that. There's no moral judgment there. That's just the reality. So the situation with food is the following. If we are eating without any gut level understanding of what's coming in, we will keep eating. If you, let me give an example. You probably haven't done this experiment in a while, but if you've ever just had, ribeye steak or two, it's pretty satiating. Maybe you also have a salad if you're me, or some broccoli or something like that. If one takes, then even after you've eaten all that, one bite of pasta, the next impulse is more,
Yes.
right? Even though you already have enough essential amino acids from those steaks, your leucine, threshold, you've reached that, et cetera, all that good stuff. Why? Because blood glucose goes up, and then you desire more because blood glucose elevations are linked directly to the dopaminergic system. So what I'm basically trying to say here is that I do think that there are elements to our food, modern food, if you will. It seems like it's anything but modern in the sense that it's worse for us than the more primitive foods. But highly processed foods, pornography, any drug that spikes dopamine dramatically, like methamphetamine, for instance, any behavior that spikes dopamine dramatically, that very quickly hijacks these circuits. And to me, the way to teach those circuits a calmer, more prudent version of themselves, right, to enter a different hypothalamic activation pattern, is to start breaking the things down into their essential elements, right, about the motivation, the pleasure, et cetera, to tamp all that down. I mean, we know that for pornography, if the pornography is very extreme, then less extreme pornography doesn't seem to work.
Well, that's because there's also a novelty kick in dopaminergic striving, right? I mean, so with any basic appetitive pleasure, there's a dopaminergic kick, but with any novelty, there's also a dopaminergic kick. So there's an optimized threshold for novelty and appetitive
The
striving.
right
that
heroes can
plays
make
out in
all the
pornography.
difference.
So there's the direct effect of the stimulus as such, but there's variation in the stimulus that's also novel, and so it's a common pattern for pornographic usage to become more, what would you say, fetishistic. That's one way of thinking about it as it progresses, because that keeps the novelty alive.
Right,
That's very dangerous. That's a very dangerous development.
Right, and I would venture in a very different domain that if you were to eat your steak slathered in barbecue sauce for a couple of weeks, going back to the way that you eat them now, which, by the way, this is a great opportunity to educate people about something that you taught me when we had dinner last, which is that if you're going to order a steak, order a Pittsburgh char. The char on the outside is incredibly tasty. We love that umami taste. Is that we have a devoted taste receptors to that?
It's complex.
Yeah. So, and if they don't know what a Pittsburgh char is, then maybe you're in the wrong restaurant and you need to educate them. But incredibly satiating, delicious, right? But if you were to slather your steaks in things, I would suspect that after a while, your plain steaks wouldn't taste as good. But the way to make them taste good again would be to eat them plain for a period of time in which the
You have to
stuff,
stop them from
all
securing
the
the mission
condiments,
area.
etc., would start to become aversive. I do believe that when
shame my
we return to the
students aren't
sort
here.
of most naturally satisfying mode of engaging with these circuits, so here we're talking about food and sex in parallel, that they become especially satiating.
No, eso es valid.
In hearing from all the people that are addicted to pornography, and they're not addicted, they love it. They're telling me it's no longer worth it, that there's this diminishment in the amount of dopamine that they're getting over time, and they feel trapped in it, and they have no sense whatsoever because they haven't socialized to go out and find a real relationship, a real sexual relationship, or a relationship.
Well, and also, too, that if you do socialize people with pornography reality, it's actually quite difficult to establish such a part. Now, I would say to some degree that's always been there. It's a complex form of behavior, but the introduction of pornography, well, sets up a whole landscape of expectation, for example, that's not necessarily play out that well in the real world, let's say.
And there's also a learning of those biological systems in the brain to make arousal by observing sex as opposed to
Oh my god.
completely different. So some of these,
That's voyeur. You're basically learning to be a voyeur. Right.
so you think about young brains that are highly plastic,
I am ready to put on a show.
so returning.
Yeah, we have
Bro,
no
bobek bro.
idea, especially for young men.
Sorry bang, anget gua. Kenapa lu?
We have no idea what effect pornography has on the development of male sexuality.
I've wondered for a while, there's something inherently rewarding about creating impact reaction at distance. Here's why. I've been watching these videos of Elon's rockets and thinking, that is awesome. That is awesome. You know, yeah, just there's one image of rocket thrusters that just captivates me. I'm not a spacecraft guy. I mean, I think it's really cool, but I wouldn't consider myself somebody that looks at the stars and thinks I want to go. I want to go up there. I might if I give an opportunity, but it's not been my thing. I looked at this and I thought, what an awesome display. But then I was thinking, like, what is power? It's really about having impact or action or distance. When we were kids, we liked dirt clod wars, right? Targeted, right? So what an incredible display of funneling the laws of physics and engineering into something that can have enormous action on distance and perhaps even take us into new galaxies. Amazing, right?
The word sin in many languages means to miss the target. Right. And it speaks to exactly what you're describing. That the cachet of action of the history. That's
I am ready to put on a
Ada
show.
one ult. Metal.
we can throw something at a distant target. So that's structured our initially still we're using our quad to hit distant targets. That's what we do. Target aims. All of the
Down to 30 seconds.
Oh my god. Tidak.
Our gaze specifies as the center of a target. There's targets everywhere, and we're unbelievably focused
TP
on
fast.
bridging the gap between where we are and where we're going. Yeah, that's the
No,
perception.
TP fast.
Final 10 seconds.
I'd like to take a quick break and thank one of our sponsors, Function. I recently became a Function member after searching for the most comprehensive
Support first.
testing. While I've long been a fan of blood testing, I really wanted to find a more in-depth program to analyze blood, urine, and saliva to get a full picture of my heart health, my hormone status, my immune system regulation, my metabolic function, my vitamin and mineral status, and other critical areas of my overall health and
Let's jump.
vitality. Function
Also,
not only
we're
provides testing
comprehensive.
of over 100 biomarkers key to physical and mental health, but it also analyzes these
Time to
results and
switch
provides
things up,
insights from top
including
doctors
which side
on the
you're on.
results.
Yeah,
For
we
example,
know.
in one of my first tests with
Open
Function,
your
I learned that I
eyes,
had too
You'll
high
need a
levels of
top-notch
mercury
team
in
to
my
win
blood.
this one.
This was totally surprising to me. I had no idea prior to taking the test. Function not only helped me detect this, but offered medical doctor-informed insights on how to best reduce those mercury levels, which included limiting my tuna consumption, because I'd been eating a lot of tuna, while also making an effort to eat more leafy greens and supplementing with NAC, N-acetylcysteine, both of which can support glutathione production and detoxification and work to reduce my mercury levels. Comprehensive lab testing like this is so important for health. And while I've been doing it for years, I've always found it to be overly complicated and expensive. I've been so impressed by Function, both at the level of ease of use, that is getting the test done, as well as how comprehensive and
30
how
seconds
actionable
before you
the tests are,
Get ready.
that I recently joined their advisory board, and I'm thrilled that they're sponsoring the podcast.
Love your
If you'd like to
sword,
try
but
Function,
don't
go
light
to
my eyes.
functionhealth.com/Huberman. Function currently has a wait list of over 250,000 people, but they're offering early access to Huberman Lab listeners. Again, that's functionhealth.com/Huberman. Get early access to Function. So this thing about
battle starts
action
in
at a
5,
distance to me
4,
feels like so
3,
inherent to our progression
2,
as a species. Most technologies are about that. In fact, if you think
All
about
you need to
social
do is
media,
capture the mission
somebody
area.
tweets something
Got it?
and, you know, when people react to it, maybe positively or
Hydra did
negatively.
to me.
The
This
school
fight got a
shooter
lot more
in a very
personal.
dark example, a sad, tragic example, right? Action at a distance.
I feel
Then
like
you think about
myself
pornography
again.
in that too. And I'm not passing any moral judgment. It's the ultimate form of creating action at a distance would be to creating human beings.
I like it cold.
I mean, you're propagating at in physical distance. I mean, it's incredible. When you think about masturbation, you think about pornography, and there is no action at a distance. And I'm not just punning. I mean, literally, there's not much action at a distance. It's all up close to oneself. But there's no impact on anybody. It's almost as if the energy that we're learning to be able to create positive things to evolve our species through action at a distance, through creation, knowledge, technology, children, communities, culture. It's
The
just
ultimate
loop-
expression.
It's
of
just
civility.
it's just looped back into oneself. It's as if, and
is
I
a
don't
mutant's
know what
greatest
language
gift.
there is for this in biology, but it's as if like all that dopaminergic drive is just kind of looped back into oneself, and it goes on your toes. And I think when I hear about the incredibly like what the language for it is only like the diminished
feel
souls
like
of these
myself
people
again.
who are coming to this, like, you know, like hell. I'm a podcaster, I'm a scientist, I know some things about the dopaminergic system, but you know, there are ways for this to help.
An extra force field?
You know, I think what they're saying is that they're just dissolving in their own, reflex, but there's no action. This is the same thing I think we see with the failure of launch kids who are at home and not having any action at a distance. I think we were designed to disperse from our families, to create action at a distance. But
A nice deep freeze.
I see so many of the problems that we face as failure to find a productive way to have action at a distance.
I am ready to put on a show. And
For example, in this book, You Wrestle with God, one of the stories I analyze is the story
a
of
nice deep
Abraham.
freeze.
It's very interesting story psychologically. I mean, I think it's stunning.
I think I should play that.
I'll lay some of that out for you. Tell me what you think about it. So the divine is characterized in classic stories of culture.
Armed and dangerous! I feel like myself
Think about
again.
the divine as the target as such, rather than any particular target. So here's a way of thinking about it. So an ambition will seize you, and then you'll aim at fulfilling that ambition. But once the ambition is fulfilled, you know
A little help, please.
it's expansive. And then if you fulfill that, the same thing. So then you can imagine that there's a meta ambition. That meta ambition. So it's something that recedes as you approach it, but it's also the thing that all ambitions have.
TTP, come here.
And we know there is such.
Down to
Can you get
30
forward?
seconds.
You wouldn't have a concept of ambition, right? Which speaks to it. Commonality. Okay. In the story of Abraham, the divine is characterized in relationship to something like ambition. So Abraham has
I am ready to put on a show.
already versed in a situation that's wealthy and a person in a situation of abundance. Abraham's parents
Let's
are
keep
wealthy.
fighting until we have
There's nothing he needs to do. And the consequence of the socialist utopia or the consumerist utopia. You can look at it either way. And there's no reason to do it. So he doesn't do anything.
That's right.
score. 0,
And then
2,
the voice
1.
comes to him, which is the voice of adventure, and it's God in this story. That's how God is defined. And
Well, you
God
can't
says
expect
to
them
him,
all.
you have to leave all this comfort, which is a very interesting proposition to begin with. It's like, why the hell would you leave that when you have everything you need? Well, the implication is that you don't have everything you need when you're being delivered everything you need. That isn't how life works. Okay, so God says you have to leave your father's tent, you have to leave your tribe, you have to leave those who speak your language, you have to venture out into the world. So God is conceptualized in this story as the impulse, the voice that compels you out into the world and that encourages you to do so. So that's a hypothesis about what the ultimate up is. Okay, and Abraham agrees, and he does so in two ways. He builds an altar, signifying his aim, that he's going to abide by the command of this voice or the invitation of this voice, and that he'll make the appropriate sacrifices. It's a crucial point to understand, because the process of transformation requires sacrifice. To be more than you are means you have to let go of that which you were. You have to make sacrifices. Now, Abraham's life is punctuated by a sequence of reaffirmations of his
Which
upward
hero
aim
do you think you want to
and
be today?
declamations of his willingness to sacrifice. Every time he finishes an adventure, he reconstitutes the covenant. Right. So this is this agreement to follow the voice of
Be
adventure.
wary. No timeline exists where
God makes it
Magneto
a deal.
yields.
That's the covenant. It's very
Now,
interesting.
who
So
am
now
I gonna
imagine,
banish from this
biologically
match?
speaking, that there is an instinct to integrate that operates within us. Okay, so now it's just as fundamental as the hypothalamic motivational states, let's say, but it's more sophisticated. And what it's trying to do is to integrate all the motivational states across time and socially, right? And then imagine it manifests itself as an instinct. It'd be something like the instinct to mature, right? To move forward, right? To leave your zone of comfort, right? And maybe there have been people like Csikszentmihalyi who've characterized that as the attractiveness of flow, and maybe it's associated with the exploratory circuit in the hypothalamus that's mediated by dopamine. Okay, but it's got its character. Now, the character of that instinct in this story is the way it's
Pick your
characterized
hero
is as the
or
voice
villain.
of adventure.
I'm not
So it's
judging.
the thing that asks you to move beyond your zone of comfort and go into the foreign world. Now, the advantage to that is that you fortify yourself and you develop, right? So no matter how good you are now, if you push yourself to the edge, you're going to be better than you are. And that's a better win than merely being good like you are now. So that would be participation in that transformative process is a higher form of attainment than mere attainment of any specific goal. Okay. So that's the call to adventure. That's the call to quest. That's what
Can you change?
Gandalf offers
Mantis.
I have made it a reality.
God
30 seconds before you
characterizes the
attack.
consequences
Get
of
ready.
that. And this is so cool. When I figured this out, it just flattened me. It's so interesting.
Please tell me
God
this is
says,
the date
okay,
night you've
you,
been planning for
God
us,
is
Reed.
defined as that which says this.
But when you think about it,
If
what
you
could be more romantic
push yourself
than
beyond your
saving
zone
the
of
universe
comfort,
side by
even if it's
side?
functioning for you,
Literally
that's
anything.
Abraham's situation. Here's what'll happen. You'll live your life in a
Your
manner
battle
that's a
starts in
blessing to you.
5, 4.
So that's a good
3,
deal, eh? Because
2,
the
1.
miserable people you're talking about, the depressed
All you need to
people,
do is capture the
trapped
mission area.
people, their
Got
life
it?
isn't a blessing to themselves. So what's a
Stand
pathway
back
to blessing?
and let
Well,
the
it's not
White
satiation,
Queen
not in
show
this
you how it's
formulation.
done.
It's voluntary. It's the voluntary quest, and it's characterized by adventure. So that's deal number one. You'll live in a life that is a blessing.
Bad guys.
Okay. And then God says, that's not all.
I feel like myself again.
You'll be a blessing to yourself in a manner that will make you renowned among other people. Just
Looks like the missionary
that's a
ready
good
to
message.
attack
You know,
now.
and take very status oriented, partly because their record of success is highly correlated to their social status. And with the psychopath's game, but still, it's like renowned. Crucially, you want to be the quarterback on the shoulders of the team. Disappointing, you know. So that'll be the second thing that happens, and then the same voice says, and that's not all. You'll be a blessing to yourself and be renowned in a manner that will maximize the probability that you will establish something of lasting value. That's a good deal. So that's stretching across time, multi-generationally, because God tells Abraham that if he follows the path of my he'll be the father of nations. What that means is that he'll establish the pattern of eternal conduct that will maximally that will maximize the success of your in the longest possible run.
This is success at a distance,
Right? Exactly. We'll make the final offer. You'll do that in a way that will bring abundance to everyone else to do. Now, so think about what that means. So cool. And I can't see how it can be wrong.
Watch your back.
It means that if you hearken to the voice that calls you out of your zone of comfort, you do that voluntarily. So you put yourself on the adventure. You will be following the instinct that has already evolved to make you to make you successful among other people, to maximize your probability of long-term success, and to do that in a way that brings abundance to the community. And then you think, look, let's take the contrary hypothesis. The contrary hypothesis would be there is no compulsion to adventure. It's like, that seems highly improbable. Or that the compulsion to adventure isn't aligned with psychological and social well-being. Well, what's the chance that the fundamental drive that would facilitate your transformation across time would not be aligned with your psychological integrity and the success of the community? We wouldn't be social animals against the world. So as far as that has to be true. Now that doesn't mean you can get lost in false adventure. That can happen. That's addiction. Or that's what pornography is. It's a false adventure, right? It's a failure to hit the proper target, you might say. But that central drive to integration across time and communally, why wouldn't that be an instinct? And then we could cap that with an observation that I also think is self-evidently true once you understand it. So imagine that you're a father. Now, this spirit of adventure is often characterized paternally, right? Insofar as God's the father in these ancient stories. So think about this. So when you see your son, now it's also true for God is the son of the when you see your son, you love your son. You see your son pushing himself along his own limits in an adventurous manner. If you're a good father, definitely encourage that. And I would say, insofar as you and that would be the embodiment of the spirit of calls to adventure. That's why Abraham is characterized, for example, in this story as forging an alliance with the spirit of his ancestors, with the deity of his ancestors. He's embodying the call to adventure, and that's what makes him the father whose reproductive enterprise is successful across the broadest possible span of time. I think I just can't see how that can be wrong. And that's a characterization of what it takes to protect. There's other, it complexifies it, because what the stories are trying to do is to give you an image of what that integrating personality might be like, and it's sophisticated, so a single characterization is insufficient. So in the story of Noah, God is, this personality is characterized quite differently. So Noah is presented as a man who's wise in his generation, which means that for his time and place, he's moral and reputable. So he's the sort of guy that people would go to for advice, because he's lived a life that's emblematic of his wisdom, let's say. Okay, now, a voice comes to him and says, batten down the hatches.
All you need to do is capture the mission area.
Trouble's coming.
Got it?
Okay, so here's the hypothesis. The hypothesis is the voice that calls to the wise to prepare in times of trouble is a manifestation of the divine, and it's the same as the voice that calls the unwilling to adventure. That's the hypothesis. So you see what the imagination is doing. Some sort of agglomerate the characterization of IA, insisting that there's an integrated unity behind it, and then trying to conceptualize that integrated unity across time. And I think that's done with radical
Judge, jury, executioner!
lively story is impressionistic representation of this integrated character. And I think that's what people follow engaging in a religious enterprise that is radically successful, like that happy engagement with a friend. Right? So he got a new personality. And that new personality had a different incentive structure. And so that just superseded.
It's almost as if, I mean, I realize that for people listening, it might not seem like this, but to us as friends, it seems we try so hard in the context of people he truly deeply cares about, more than anybody in the world. It was almost like it was astonishing.
How does he know? If you asked him, okay, you had every reason to change, and yet you didn't. And then all of a sudden you did. Like, how does he understand?
This is real firepower!
Christian religious language. He said that he felt Jesus' love for him, and he saw an image of who he could become. This was important perhaps. No doubt, just perhaps, but no doubt, of who he could become.
That was worth it.
And he had the adequate social support within this place. And so there was reinforcement.
Yeah.
But what's remarkable is that he was able to take that outside of this place.
Right.
It was a residential facility. Outside this place. And
They're ahead of us.
to this day, he is wow.
Judge!
And that's the thing I will say in the extremely successful as a commercial artist, and happy and in service, and just seems like he got a brain trust.
Right, so there's a mystery there. It's kind of threefold. One is, what the hell did it mean to realize that Jesus Christ loved him?
This is real firepower!
Somehow that's associated he developed a who he could be. He was everything he could be. There's a relationship. And then there's this third mystery is the culmination of those two phenomena. Freedom and his addiction, even out of the context of the center. That's right. Very difficult to understand. But, we know, think about it this way. If you're possessed by rage, different phenomena have dopaminergic cachet to you than if you're possessed by sexual desire. Like, obviously, right? Right, so the idea that a given stimuli produces a given motivational response is incorrect because that's a framework right? And most, so I think one of the best ways to understand a motivational drive is that a motivational drive grips the target. It establishes the target, right? It may increase the probability that certain action patterns will make themselves manifest. Compulsive element. Fundamentally, what it's doing is changing the target. That rearranges the perceptual landscape and transforms the emotion. Because now, if your target is there, things that need you there are dopaminergically relevant. If your target is there, things that need you there are. Same underlying emotion, the stimuli, so to speak, that give rise to the emotion are radically different. So now he has a different orientation and aim, and so the incentive structure of his cycle is radically transformed. Now we know that can happen because that happens to you when you move from one motivated state to another.
I think in 12-step programs, they allow the steps to be milestones. I mean, there's clearly a dopaminergic component. I hope people understand that dopamine is dumb. In fact, dopamine isn't dumb. Dopamine has no intelligence at all. It's just a currency of motivation and reward. And
which is why it can be gained by cocaine.
Which is why it can be gained by cocaine or most anything that can, ferret its way into the hypothalamic system. And I hope people picked up on what you said before, because it's so important that as one moves toward a target, dopamine increases en route to that target. I'm rephrasing what you said before. You said it wonderfully. I just want to make sure people understand that as that dopamine increases, the probability that your perception will go to something other than the target decreases exponentially. As you get closer and closer, you get more and more dopamine. The greater the elevation in dopamine, the lower the probability that you'll engage in any other pattern of self.
Right.
It's like it's almost or a personality type other than the one that you're engaged in pursuit of this behavior will emerge.
Not least because as you approach successfully, the probability of ultimate success is obviously increasing. So it makes perfect sense that you would narrow and focus.
You run faster as you see the finish line.
Right.
Faster and faster.
Right.
This concept of sin as missing the target for this definition of sin, I think, is incredibly important.
Hamartia is the Greek word, and it's literally an archery term, but it's also the word for sin in ancient Hebrew is also an archery term. And so, and there's other languages where that's the case, but it's really important to understand that that notion is predicated on this target-seeking psychophysiology, and that's unbelievably deeply built into us, as you pointed out. You know, our eyes are target established. Well, it's so important to us that we infer aim from gaze, right? And it's more than that. Not only do we infer aim from gaze,
Which hero do you think you want to
we
be
mimic
today?
the psychophysiological state of the target that we're watching as a consequence of our inference of
Freedom.
aim from gaze. So if I can see what you're looking
where
at,
Magneto
then I
yields.
can occupy the same psychophysiological
Now,
state that you
who
do,
am I
and
gonna
that's the
banish from
basis
this
of my
match?
understanding.
Oh, this is so important, and there's something that I've never talked about on this or any other podcast, which is that in humans, we have a massive expansion of an area of the frontal cortex called the frontal eye fields. So there's circuitry deep in the brain. If you want to look it up, it's superior colliculus. It's also called the tectum in other species. It means roof. It's the roof of the midbrain, etc., that generate reflexive eye movements. You stimulate in there, it's like a machine. In fact, a colleague of mine who's now retired at Stanford, Eric Knudsen, who did some beautiful work on neuroplasticity, was describing an experiment where they take out the frontal cortex of these owls. Owls are, because they they don't have much eye movements. They move their head almost all the way around, right? We've all seen that. And they use this for homing in on their targets. The owl or a monkey or a human, in the absence of a prefrontal cortex or suppression of prefrontal cortex, becomes like a machine. You click here, they look there.
Right.
You click here, they look there.
You'll need
Puppies
a
are like
top-notch
this.
team to
Kittens
win
are
this
like
one.
this. Everything's a stimulus. Why? Because there isn't that top-down inhibition of those reflexes. In humans, we have an area.
That's why a cat with no brain is.
I will bring
exploratory.
peace to this universe.
Right.
everything
Only
is
the
everything's a
Be
target.
wary.
Everything's a
No
target.
timeline
Everything is a
exists
target.
And there's no
where
context
Magneto
dependent.
yields.
Right.
I love that you gave the example of the decerebrate cats. They even can do fictive motion. They can walk on a treadmill, and it's like with no cortex.
Yeah,
it's
right.
amazing.
It is
Makes you rethink the cortex.
That's for sure.
And humans have these frontal eye fields, which are an evolved area. They're present in other species too, but they're massively extended in humans. So this is a cortical area, frontal cortical area, devoted to controlling gaze and the context and
30
control of
seconds
gaze.
before
So
your
it's
turn.
no longer the
Get
front,
ready.
it's just a reflex that you can suppress, as in the case with an adult cat versus a kitten,
If
or a
you
dog
step
versus
out
a
of
puppy.
line, Mr. Barnes,
The frontal
I
eye
will
field
not
actually
hesitate
regulates
to
all
rip
sorts of
that
aspects.
metallic limb from your
Oh,
body.
like he's looking at me directly. Is it aggressive? Well, then maybe I'll activate my aggression, or maybe I'll brace my defenses. Or, wow, we came to this party together, but she seems super interested in like
Battle starts in 5.
directing her gaze. How are
Four,
we inferring this?
3,
Sometimes it's body language,
2,
sometimes it's this,
1.
sometimes he looked at her. There are all these memes.
All you
about
need to
this,
do
right?
is capture the mission
Right?
area.
The
Got
famous,
it?
the famous look over the shoulder
Yeah.
meme
I
that seems to
don't
have
think
taken
I
over
could
the internet
handle
from
the
time
With
to
the
time.
appropriate facial response.
Exactly. So humans have a massively expanded notion of what gaze is and our ability to control gaze and understand the gaze. I just
Integrates, and you become cortically dominant. The target of your gaze becomes right. This is a big deal because it means that you can concentrate on the distance. Let's say temporary distance at the expense of the proximate. So good thing if you're walking down the street, behind you, you'll do an anti-predator crouch and then turn, and you'll do that essentially automatically.
so
Yeah.
curl up.
Yeah, and then
turtle
turn,
up
and you turn to the place where your stereoscopic audition has indicated that the noise emanates. Right, and that's automatic. That's the control of the eye gaze and the posture by those underlying.
Superior has a map of auditory.
Yeah. Right, and you do that before you think. Right, okay, so that's an activation of the eye fields, let's say, by these underlying motivational systems that have this personality-like autonomy. But you can orient your
Help get that vehicle to its destination.
orient your eyes heavenward.
Planet?
Well, what does that mean? Well, you can think about it. It means to search out the North Star that navigates for you unerringly, regardless of the situation at hand. Imagine you could progress towards a target in a manner that made all the potential targets that you could progress towards more likely. It's a meditative. You said that's what happened to your friend, right? Because not only did you dispense with this addiction, but all of the other enterprises associated that he was pursuing in his life became more effective.
It's almost like it is as if every goal was elevated.
Right?
And it's funny because for the first couple of months that I was interacting with him, I thought,
Okay.
like he's different.
Yeah.
And I thought, like most people would, perhaps
create
think
my
like,
own
all
shit.
right, let's see.
Keep going.
But this has been 4 years now. He's very consistent with his program. He's involved in a program that keeps him on track. But he's elevated, and he's not talking about it. It's like he's elevated, but he's grounded. When we talk to him, very, very present. Yeah. And even his text messages are very much about what's going on. Asking questions that are very much
By the eye of
it's
Agamotto!
been a remarkable thing because he was about as down and had so much to lose and had essentially risked over to the point where I didn't think it was ever going to break out, and all of his friends thought the same. And why the lie did it was because I can say this without doing because no one knows. I'm godfather to his son, and his son is thriving, and it's wonderful to see. And I just think of sometimes it's fantastic. So there's nothing short of spectacular.
Okay, so let me put that into context of say an archetypal story. So I did a course at the Leadership Academy on the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is it's a meditative strategy. It's very practical. It's very, very practical. And it emerges out of the biblical tradition in a very grounded manner. It's a logical extension of the biblical ethical precursors. So what Christ says to his followers in the course of the Sermon on the
Vehicle
Mount
reached a
is,
checkpoint. Keep up the momentum.
first, orient your eyes up.
Render me assistance.
So that's in alignment with the notion that the firstborn is to be consecrated to God.
The moon!
Meaning is something like this. Imagine that your life consists of a sequence of episodes. The beginning sets the frame. So at the beginning of an impulse, you want to lift your eyes heavenwards to establish the highest possible goal so that constitutes the frame of perception for that episode. That's the idea. Where the first page is consecrated to God. So, for example, think about Prosaic. Before we sat down for a podcast, because your powers and might
Against the world.
we strive to make the podcast most radically successful. Now you can imagine that could be subordinate to either of our proximal desire for an increase in short-term personal fame. Right? Or we can try to dominate conversation. Or we could orient ourselves and we could do what we could pursue the track towards revelation, so to speak, and we could elevate our conversation in that manner. Okay, and that would set the frame for the conversation. And the good podcast is always they're not playing games. Or if they're playing games, it's of the highest possible order. It's a quest. Yeah, okay. Quest for what? Enlightenment.
The moon!
Mutual understanding. And then maybe for the education of those who are participating. Okay, so Christ says first, orient your eyes up. As to love God above all. Whatever that upward divinity is, you establish an allegiance to that, and you allow that to determine your perceptions and your motivations. Next, operate under the assumption that other people, like you, participate in that nature of that utmost aim and treat them that
Don't
way.
let anything stand in your way.
Next, concentrate on the right. Right, and that's exactly right, because it's exactly in that. When you specify your aim, the path
By the eye of
otherwise, you never
Agamotto!
use your senses to orient. You never get anywhere. So if you aim up to the best of your ability, then the path is what will make itself manifest in front of you. Then you have to attend. So then you get this weird perverse optimality, which is you're focused on the longest temporal scale and the highest possible
mystic arch
elevation,
won't
and you
fail
can
me
make most
again.
use of what's right in front of you. And that's the implication in the Sermon on the Mount is that there's no difference between that and participating in life eternal as it unfolds in the moment. And I think that seems to me to be exactly right. It's exactly right.
A shortcut.
And so, you know, I was thinking about, because you said your friends, all of your friends have become elephants. So imagine that one problem you might want to solve is what you do. But a much how do you develop relationship to one another across the broadest span of time and person, so that everyone has the highest probability of succeeding? That would be like the pursuit of a medical. I would say that's what defines the
for the sorcerer supreme.
There's another variant of
The
that.
current score is 2.
A variant of that would be
0.
not how do you solve the problem of
Time to
any
switch
given
things up,
thing that
including
terrifies
which
you,
side
but
you're
how
on.
do you solve the problem of the class of things
Open
that
your
terrify you?
eyes.
The right
And
heroes could make all the
dragon
difference.
mythology is the
No
solution to that
timeline
problem.
exists where
So the
Magneto
attitude there is
yields.
you adopt the stance of voluntary, a voluntary approach in the face of terror, because that's the best meta strategy, right? And that's the strategy that works to protect you across the largest possible array of dangerous situations. This is what we learned as clinical psychologists with exposure therapy.
Round 2. Go.
Right? You find the particulars of what someone is afraid of. That turns out to be somewhat irrelevant.
To mutant
You
kind.
teach people to voluntarily confront what they're avoiding. And that doesn't make them less afraid. It makes them more competent and braver. And
He'll
that
be coming in 30
generally.
seconds. Stay
Right.
strong.
And so, yeah, the religious pursuit is the pursuit of
When I was a
of
boy,
medicals
you
in
were a
relationship
symbol of
to
hope
positive
in a
negative
world
emotion.
where
That's a good way
none
of thinking about it.
existed.
And what am I to
I'd
you
like to
now?
take a quick break and thank one of our sponsors,
Hard
Element.
to say,
Element is an electrolyte
but
drink that
I
has
suppose
everything you
we shall
need
find
and nothing
out
you
soon
don't.
enough.
That means the electrolytes, sodium, magnesium, and potassium,
The
in the
battle
correct
starts in
ratios,
5,
but no sugar.
4,
We should all know that
3,
proper hydration is
2,
critical for optimal
1.
brain and body function. In
You
fact,
have to
even a
stop
slight
that from
degree of
securing the mission
dehydration can
area.
diminish your cognitive and physical performance to a
this may be
considerable
one
degree.
problem
It's
I
also
can't
important that you're not
solve
just
in
hydrated,
an
but that you
hour
get adequate amount of electrolytes in the right ratios. Drinking a packet of Element
much
dissolved in
better.
water makes it very easy to ensure that you're getting adequate amounts of hydration and electrolytes. To make sure that I'm getting proper amounts of both, I dissolve one packet of Element in about 16 to 32 ounces of water when I wake up in the morning, and I drink that basically first thing in the morning. I'll also drink a packet of Element dissolved in water during any kind of physical exercise that I'm doing, especially on hot days when I'm sweating a lot, losing water and electrolytes. There are a bunch of different great tasting flavors of Element. I like the watermelon, I like the raspberry, I like the citrus. Basically, I like all of them. If you'd like to try Element, you can go to drinkelement.com/hubermanlab and the free Element sample pack with the purchase of any Element drink. Again, that's drinkelement.com/hubermanlab and the free sample pack.
I love this idea
Yes, the world.
of looking at your defining, or at least having a sense of internalization as greatest possible. And when I say greatest, for oneself, but also other people.
Yeah, that's life more abundant. That's the symbology. Your powers of life those are the same. So imagine you're fighting with each other. Now you're dominating the range. Now, the advantage of that is you're ready. And but the disadvantage is you're going to strike with proximal range. Okay, now you don't want to be a pushover. That's it. So then what can you do instead? You could pause and you could remember, okay, if this could rectify itself in the best possible manner, what would that look like? Well, it's complicated, right? You
I'm
don't want
opening
your
a
wife to
portal.
be defeated, and you don't want to be defeated, and you want to solve the problem.
A shortcut.
But you don't want to sweep it under the rug. You want to solve it in a solve that works across time, that benefits you in an upward manner.
And you have to make sure that you're not hijacked by that hypothalamic circuit or personality.
You will
You
be.
need to stop that vehicle
If you
in
don't
tracks.
alter your aim, you will be. Because you need to substitute. You've got to think, I'd really like to win this. Like, I'd seriously like to win this battle. It's like, no, you need something better than that victory. And that would be
Better stop
the,
that
a
vehicle.
victory that would deepen and enrich your relationship and help it grow across time. And then you can remember that. It's like, I'm going to listen. Even though I think my wife is wrong, I'm going to listen and I'm going to see if I can find a path in the argument that makes our relationship better. And then you think, now you have to really want that. You really want that. You've got that vision fleshed out properly. You'll want that more than you want to win. And then you might say, well, why? There's one of the greatest parables where it talks about the pearl of great price, which is that pearl that a rich man would sell everything he owns to possess. And it's something like a reference to that. It's like, why would
By
you
the
ever
eye of Agamotto!
if you could, an ultimate victory? That's the battle that's between the salvation of the soul and the victory in sin. Religious language. Betrayal. You can win a local victory, and it looks like you win. But if you forego the ultimate gain, that's not a victory. That's a defeat. Obviously, it might even be a worse defeat than if you lost.
Absolutely. I've been spouting off on social media podcasts for a while now that any big inflection in dopamine that isn't preceded by a lot of effort to generate that dopamine inflection is very difficult. Think drugs, think pornography, think highly processed food. Think anything that creates this big sense of indulgence and pleasure without any effort is running counter current to our evolution. You could say, well, if you're living
No reward is destroyed. That's
of some sort. And the other coming up again and again today, and I love that it is this notion of the temporal domain, of rewards that exist over multiple scales of broad. One of the things that I feel truly lucky is the fact that I went the path of science where, we were chuckling about this earlier, project takes a year, then you have to restart because that project went nowhere. And then you finish the project, you submit a paper, the review. I mean, the reward schedule in science could take 4 years. It's not just about getting a degree, like getting papers through sometimes took a year, sometimes took 2 years. Sometimes things didn't go well and you had to publish in a journal that you wouldn't have wanted to, or sometimes you had to abandon projects altogether. So my reward system is trained up on lots of time scales, short, medium, and time scales. As I've moved into podcasting, the temporal loops are shorter, faster. But nonetheless, there's content, but I think platforms like X have been wonderful. Especially nowadays, frankly, Instagram, etc. They're very useful, but they train us, and I imagine they've trained the young brains that were weaned on them, because I wasn't, but that were weaned on them, for fast temporal time scales. This isn't like playing a long poker game. This is like playing the slot machine over and over and over, right?
Yes.
It's not like a 4-day tournament.
Complete with intermittent random reinforcement, which is what happens when something goes viral, unpredictably. Right. Really.
And then
By the eye of Agamotto!
Moment the riches
The moon haunts you!
that exists as a possibility.
Down to 30 seconds.
So I think that one of the things that could be useful, just venturing a hypothesis here, is that young and older people could take a look at their life and ask, over what variation of time scales do I derive reward?
Yeah, definitely.
Training for a marathon is a longer time scale.
Well, that's also a hallmark of maturity.
Yeah,
right?
school, a degree, etc. Business, the time scales are sometimes faster, short.
The better question, and this is kind of what's how can I optimize my long-term view while maximizing the focus on the moment? Because then you get both. That is a really good deal, because now you're doing yourself in a manner that works in an iterated way that's socially productive, right? And maybe intergenerationally socially productive. That would be the best.
Only 60 seconds left.
What you're doing as a group.
The moon!
But it enables you to also derive maximal impact from each step you take forward in the present. So, Carl Friston told me we were talking about entropy and emotion. I figured out a few years ago with a couple of my students that anxiety signifies the emergence of entropy. Technically, I was really thrilled about it. It gives emotion. Friston, he also knew that he'd also be working that He said that you get a dopamine kick to reduce the entropy in relationship. Oh my God, that's so cool because it means that uncertainty is entropy. That it emerges, you get anxious. But when you see yourself stepping towards a goal, you get a dopamine kick. And the reason that's an entropy related to entropy is because
2, 2, 3.
with each successful step you take towards a goal, you reduce the uncertainty of the pursuit, which is
Well, you can't
manifested
expect to
in
win
what
'em all.
you described, which is when you see the finish line, you start running faster. Right, so they're both related together.
But to have goals at multiple time scales,
yes.
you need to be able to I love this entropy argument. It makes total sense that you want to be able to withstand the periods of time when you don't know whether or not things are becoming more or less uncertain.
Yes.
This is part of becoming an adult, if you will.
Okay.
right?
Okay. So yeah, that was exactly the thread. So there's two corollaries of that. One is that the more valuable the goal towards which you're progressing, the higher the dopamine kick per unit of advancement. So what that means is you want an ultimate goal operating in the domain of each proximal sub-goal. And that's what happens with this upward orientation. It's like what you're trying to do is to make things as good as they could be, whatever that means, over the longest possible span of time for the largest number of people, you included. Now, you're not going to know exactly how to do
Which
that,
hero
but
do
that
you
can be
think
your
you wanna
goal.
be today?
Okay, now that's going to inform your perceptions and your perceptions of pathway, but it's also going to modify your reward system because now every proximal step forward is an indicator of entropy reduction in regard to that meta goal.
Now,
Well, there isn't
who
any,
am I gonna
by
banish for
definition,
this
there
match?
isn't anything you can do that's more exciting than that. See, that kind of explains why your friend was able to pop out of his addictive frame because now he's doing something that's so worthwhile that the temptation of alcohol, let's say, pales in comparison. Right. And
Right. It's a rewriting of the reward contingencies.
yeah, right, exactly. And now you could imagine a situation where a culture explores across time to find out how to characterize that goal such that if that goal is pursued, people integrate psychologically in a manner that integrates them socially across large spans of time. I think that's what happens when the monotheistic revelation emerges. That's what's happening from a biological perspective. So we're starting to characterize the longest term goal. Yeah, something like that.
This is why I believe that pornography is potentially so poisonous.
You'll need a top-notch
Because
team to
the
win
level
this
of
one.
uncertainty is basically zero.
Yeah.
People can
Who are you
access
calling a
what they
raccoon,
want to see.
huh?
They can keep foraging until they find it.
Yeah.
And that's not the way that relationships work. The way relationships work is I ask somebody out, they might say yes, they might say no. Go out on a date, they might not want a second date.
Well,
You
and
know,
that's all
things
very-
could progress. You might think that you're on the path to one thing and it turns out it doesn't work or you're not compatible. You know, I mean,
that's also extremely salutary because if you're being rejected, like say you're a foraging male and you're being rejected all the time, and you forego that for pornography, what you're foregoing is the
30
correctness that
seconds
all
before
those
your
women
attack.
are offering you.
Get ready.
Like they're rejecting you because there is something wrong. Like seriously, there's something wrong. And now you escape from that. That's what there's no more rejection. It's like, yeah, no more rejection, no more learning, no more improvement, and no possibility of an actual life. Yeah. No distal
battle starts in 5,
accomplishment. Right?
4,
the only
3,
implication of
2,
the pornography
1.
masturbation scenario is more pornography. That's the only implication. That's all that possibly could arise.
It's worse than that because it's more pornography generate gains. As you said, you have to chase that novelty edge. Well, and that means what? It's going to get more and more extreme. Well, that's not a good scenario. That's not a good. Like, what do you mean more and more extreme exactly? Like, where does that end? Well, you know, a casual glance at online pornography can give you some real insight into where that is. Like, that's a bottomless pit, and in the most pernicious possible manner, because sexuality is definitely twist itself into pathological forms that undermine psychological integrity and demolish society.
Well, we see this with people who are highly successful and seem to have lots of areas where they're regular, and then they collapse their lives. I mean, we sometimes see with the drugs of abuse, although unless those drugs of abuse are dopaminergic and people have them in check, so to speak, which is exceedingly rare, it's usually just a matter of time, and they don't reach it.
Yes, well, time is the problem, as Ricky pointed out. Let me tell you another story. This is from Revelation.
Maximum
Revelation is the end of time.
This is real
Time ends. Our adventures end, our lives end, our relationships end. So the end has a pattern. Revelation is a vision of the eternal pattern of the end. So here's an element of vision. It's so remarkable. I figured this out for enjoying compassion. So there's a vision, a subvision, sequential dream of Revelation of the scarlet beast and the Lord of Babylon. And it's very relevant to our discussion on pornography. You'll understand it right away. So it's a vision of how society disintegrates. Okay, now imagine how society disintegrates. Men disintegrate according to their pattern, and women disintegrate according to their pattern. That makes perfect sense. Society disintegrates. Men and women disintegrate. There's no reason to assume that their pattern of disintegration is okay. Scarlet beast. That's the scarlet beast of the state. That's Babylon, let's say. That's the degenerate tyrannical state. It has multiple heads. Why? Because whatever united it has vanished. It's like the death of God. It's vanished. And so now it's got heads in every direction, so it's confused. And it's red, scarlet, that confusion, that disintegration is the precursor to the river of blood, the Red Sea, the swamp of pain. So when the patriarchal state disintegrates, it loses its meaning, and then it's
judge, jury, executioner.
That's the emblem of descent into diverse chaos.
Gaze is everywhere.
Precisely.
I am ready to put on a show.
Now, that's the disintegration of the patriarchy. Atop that is you're welcome. Or Babylon, a beautiful woman who's subordinated her psyche to the fantasy sexuality. She's the mother of all prostitutes. So she's extremely attractive. She's clad in gold. She holds a cup that has nothing but the consequences of the fornication.
Is this like, I mean, just say it. Recently, there's been a number of posts on X of this woman who had sex with 100 men in a day. And now, now she's saying she's had sex with 1,000 men.
Yeah, well, she seems to be rethinking her plan given the emotional consequences she had to her last success.
Yeah, I must say.
Her mother is the finance.
Speechless.
That's for sure.
I'm speechless. My response to her post 100 men thing was, it was hard for me to know to what extent it was part of the whatever
performance. Probably hard for
whatever
her
it
to
was,
know,
you know. So it was hard for me to discern what was really going on there. I'm not a psychologist, but anyone who saw that would say this is a pretty dark situation.
It's way darker than anybody who wanted to hold on to their sanity would possibly imagine.
What's also dark, and I'm not saying this from a place of moral judgment, I'm just saying this from a place of just, wow, this woman obviously navigating life in this way, her choice, clearly. But the fact that so many people know about this, the fact that so many people talking about it, I think in service to a greater good, that this is now out it's out there. Just like seeing somebody, just like seeing somebody murder somebody.
I am ready to put on a show.
Recently, a video.
This is real firepower.
But those two things leveled up or leveled down. One's idea of what humans are capable of by allowing
And what's acceptable.
It's acceptable. So the threshold shift, that's for sure. The threshold shift
I'll patch you up. Okay, so that's a great example. Young man betrayed himself in the deepest possible manner, and all of the people that are following, all the young women who are in So you have this figure back of the degenerate state. That's the degenerate feminine.
You're welcome.
Female sexuality commoditizes masculine and degenerate. That's a sign of the end of it. And that makes perfect sense. Well, why wouldn't female sexuality commoditize when the masculine is no longer reliable?
3,
It's exactly what you'd expect.
0.
You know how the story ends?
Time to switch things up, including which
There's
side
another
you're
element.
on.
The degenerate state offers the Horic Babylon
Who are
as
you calling a
enticement for its
raccoon, huh?
degeneration.
The right
You
here
can have
could make
everything you
all
want
the
on the
difference.
sexual side. At the end of that sub-story, the state, the beast, kills the prostitute. And so what that means is that the long-term consequences of sacrificeless sexual satiety is that sexuality itself is destroyed. And I think we're seeing that in our society now. 30% of Japanese under the age of 30 are virgins. Right, it's about the same in South Korea. Right, the birth rates in those countries have plummeted. Like they're way, way below replacement. And increasingly, 50%
They'll be
of
coming
women
in 30
in the West
seconds.
are
Stay
childless at 30.
Yeah, birth rates are way, way down.
And going down as well. 50% are childless. Half of them will never have a child because 30 is always pushing. 95% of them will regret it. We're already in a situation in the West where 1 in 4 women will be involuntarily childless. Right, and so it's so, well, that's a good
The battle
example,
starts in
as I
5,
said earlier,
4,
of how these things are
3,
characterized in
2,
this symbolic
1.
language that outlines the starkest of biological reality. Once we get you said that there was a problem, your sense of effortless gratification. It's like, well, the problem, part of the problem with effortless gratification is it destroys itself. And it's so interesting because the promise of the sexual revolution in the pill was an unlimited horizon of sexual opportunity. We know it, but the actual consequence of that appears to be that's the pathway to the demise of sexuality itself.
This was If You Can't Be With the One You Love, Love the One You Love. Someone I know who was in the 20s, in the 1970s, explained to me, I always thought that song was about, you can't be with the person that you love, you find someone else you can love. He explained to me that's not what that was about. That was about the wildness of it.
Right, that promise.
Yeah, that was about the promiscuity that emerged as that in the 1970s.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the aftermath of the birth control pill, it was not surprising that people thought maybe that was possible. But that was wrong. It was seriously wrong. And we were going to be dealing with the consequences of that for a very long time.
You said that the patriarchy, the masculine fails before the horrible happens parallel. Yeah, in concert. So it's not causal.
No, you can't. Men and women degenerate at the same rate, right? I mean, we're involved in that process. So, there's no oppressing women. There's no oppressing women. It's like we're joined at the hip, so to speak. And so, these cultures cloak women and silence them.
Gonna get some
You might think, well, that leads to the domination of men. It just turns men into pathological tyrants. Like, there's no victory over one sex that's a victory of any sense at all.
It's anti-humanity.
Of course.
You're welcome.
Of course.
There was a recent post on X that just held my gaze, my attention, where it was a back and forth debate, a pseudo-political social debate, and then there were 3 words that I'll just say that Mark Andreessen said, it was about restoring vigor, pride, and achievement. And I thought, he's not political. That's a beautiful trifecta. Vigor, pride, and achievement. To celebrate those. And I put that next to, you know, the deep pleasure in generative action at a distance, a technological development, the rockets, and there are other generative
exactly
achievements.
You're ready for action.
Nice thanks, Sheila.
The
Only
most,
60 seconds left.
the highest form of potential safety. It's not
This is real firepower!
Right, and so one of the things I've noticed, this is something I'm talking
KT, enjoy the amplifier! Well, okay.
independent.
Heels are more dangerous than...
Those are large audiences.
Relay
About 3,000 or
30
4,000 people.
seconds.
And there's one place
The moon haunts you!
dead silence. The audiences are usually
Don't mind me!
He's
quiet
stopping in their tracks.
in the events. That's what it is. I'm sure you know this. You want to listen to the audience. You want to stay in that zone where no one's moving. Because then you know their attention is focused. And you can hear that. I wouldn't say you can play with it, not manipulate it.
You'll have to keep fighting until we have a winner.
I learned a long while ago that adventure, let's say, is the highest form of reward. But there's a corollary to that conservatives need to learn, because they don't know this. Conservatives talk about responsibility, but they're conscientious.
Your powers are mine!
Beautiful, orderly, productivity. Responsibilities and conscientious people. What they fail to understand is that there's no difference between responsibility and adventure. They're the same thing. And you can tell young men in particular that. So look, you want to have an adventure, because you definitely want an adventure. You're built for that. It will increase your status. It will improve your life. Like it'll improve the probability of outcomes. You want an adventure. Every fiber of your being is screaming. Where do you find it? You find it in the voluntary action responsibility.
Fire mode.
And
Burst!
that's like everyone. No young person is being taught that. I catch you up.
This is important.
This is real firepower!
Final
One of the
score.
first things I do when I wake up in the morning,
2-0.
I look around the kitchen, I look around my room, and I try and get things in order.
Yeah.
And I now I need that in order to do it.
Another epic
But it's just
victory.
first order of business.
Well, it's also a great it's a great morning ritual, because it's often the case, especially if you have a bit of a depressive tilt, that it's kind of hard to get oriented properly in the morning, you know. And if you take, like, I moved into a new house a while back in Northern Ontario, and the garage wasn't set up properly. And the first thing I did in the morning was I went out in the garage for 10 minutes. And 10 minutes isn't very long, but I would like order one thing, you know, part of the toolbox or whatever. And like if you do that every day, things fall into order pretty quickly. But it was a real relief to me in some way, because I didn't have to think about what I was going to do when I woke up. I made my bed, and then I went and fixed the garage for like 10 minutes.
And you get
then-
the brain into what I call linear operations, like the ability to carry out something linearly when there's a near infinite number of options in your phone, in your physical space. I think
Yes.
is so powerful, because
Yeah, well, it's an antidote to chaos.
You're picking a target,
Absolutely.
and it
it's
certainly isn't a
reduction of
sinful
entropy.
target. And you know it's not sin to clean your room
Yeah.
or to organize your space or the garage.
Yeah.
So you start with it. So within the day, one can do that. In terms of, I really love the stickiness, the positive stickiness of this idea that adventure and responsibility are the same.
Well,
thing.
let's take that apart, because it's not immediately obvious. But look, when you go, let's say you go see an adventure movie, James Bond movie, you know, classic archetypal action adventure movie with some romance thrown in there. What is he doing? Well, difficult things.
He's trying to solve crimes. He's trying to catch bad guys.
Yeah, he's trying to battle with the forces of
Which hero
chaos
do you
that
think you might
undermine
be
the
today?
international order, right? I mean, it's high order adventure, and he's putting himself at substantive risk to do that. That's the sacrificial element to it. But everybody's gripped by it. Well,
Who are you
why?
calling a
Because
raccoon,
the stakes are high.
Now,
What does it
who
mean
am I
for
gonna
the stakes
banish
to be
from this
high?
match?
It means the outcome matters. What does that mean? It means it's a life and death situation. Like, none of that makes itself present without the hoisting of a burden. And here's something else I figured out, so remarkable. So I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is the first church that was the first Christian church that was established. And hypothetically, it was established on the location of the crucifixion, right? And so at the center of the church is an altar, and at the center of the altar is the image of this crucifixion, right? Which is a sacrificial image. Okay. Crucifixion, sacrificial image, altar, church. Then around the church is the community. And then that becomes the pattern for European towns, right? And all the towns that everyone wants to go visit in Europe have that pattern. Okay, so why? Well, responsible sacrifices
You'll
at
need a
the core of the
top-notch
community.
team to win this one.
That's what's dramatized in all that, in that architecture, in that sacred architecture, in the actual.
I will bring peace to this universe.
In
no
the
matter
structure
cost.
of the community with its center. Well, of course, sacrifice is the center of the community. Obviously, because community is a sacrificial gesture. Like, insofar as you're not all about what you want right now, you're offering up a sacrifice of what it is that you want right now to the future and the community. Clearly, and now it's going to integrate you psychologically, it's going to integrate the society and make
simply
it
a man
productive.
who wishes
And
to
it's so
use his
interesting
power
that
for
we
good.
acted that out for that proposition out for
30
well, the
seconds
whole,
before you attack. Get ready.
at least insofar as you're talking about Christian-oriented civilization for the last 2,000 years, without ever really noticing that we were dramatizing the proposition that sacrifice is at the center of the community. It's like, well, obviously.
Well, what are we to make of, cities like San Francisco, which I grew up just south of, and it, by any standard, it's a beautiful city. I know people are going to some people roll their eyes. I mean, you have the bay on one side, you have the ocean on the other. It has magnificent bridges. I mean, it's a testament to what's possible in a city in terms of diverse landscapes, etc. But the downtown, the center of the city, is just beyond anybody's sense of indecency to walk down in the afternoon hours, let alone at night. So that at this point, you wonder, is the center really the center? I mean, you literally have to avoid the center of the city in order to get away from it. And it's very, it's sad. It's tragic.
So,
It's tragic.
so you're asking a symbolic question. In some ways, you're asking, what is the nature of the relationship between the state of society in general and the fact that the centers of cities have deteriorated? Well, those aren't unrelated, not in the least. They're very tightly related because the center does not hold. Right? What's the famous poem from the 1920s? The center is loosened, right? And mere chaos is around it. Mere chaos is set upon the world. I haven't got the quote precisely right. That was T.S. Eliot. He knew that the center pillar, the center is chaos. That's what the oldest civilizations of humankind. The question might be, what has caused the degeneration of the center?
I'm cursed.
Man, think about that.
Oh, I'm fine. Don't mind me.
The whole culture war is meditation on exactly that question.
Feeling fantastic.
You know, there's an insistence on the modern side.
This is real
And that's a devastating blow to the racists and Russians, because they were wrong. We do not build our knowledge the consequence of an aggregation of facts. That's not how it works. And a story is something like the prioritization of facts.
I heard recently that religion teaches through story, philosophy teaches through language that is divorced from story, and that science is designed to try and remove itself from language almost entirely. I mean, you'd love to just present graphs and figures, but you have to explain what's there, right? There's a discussion, there's some conclusions, but the idea is that the scientists are supposed to be objective and to interpret the data as they stand.
Yeah,
to not
only
infuse
be informed by the facts.
to not infuse a story. But story is the way that the brain works, right? I mean, beginning, middle, end.
It's also, the story creeps into science in, what would you say, unavoidably. So here, let me give you this example. So I read a book once, it was written by an ex-KGB agent who talked about a lab in the Soviet Union where there was a dreadful accident at one point that resulted in the death of about 500 people. They were
Only 60 seconds left.
trying to produce an amalgam of Ebola, smallpox, and then to aerosolize it. Okay, now look, from a strictly scientific perspective, value free. There's no difference between pursuing that branch of knowledge and pursuing any other. Now you say, well, that's preposterous.
You
It's like,
are
yes,
under my protection.
yes, but it's preposterous because we know that you can have an evil scientist. I mean, Jesus, that's the trope of how many movies is evil scientist a trope? Uses evil scientist as a trope. Like the bad guy is almost always an evil scientist. So it's not like we don't know that. So that science itself, which is the value-free pursuit of facts, can be an evil entity. If you're a good scientist, the story's always going to be back. Why are you conducting? Well, I want to understand.
Again!
Things better. That's the story. I want to pursue truth in a manner that makes things better. That's the story. Well, you might say, well, that's self-evident. Like, it's only self-evident when it's working properly. When it's not working properly, things get bad quick. So there were scientists in 1871, Japanese in China. And you cannot read about what the old
This is fantastic!
Right. What happened in 1871? It's the worst human enterprise ever seen by a law. And that was the scientific enterprise gone astray, let's say. It has to be encapsulated within culture. And the question is, what's the appropriate value? You're welcome. We're starting to figure that out. Because, I talked to Richard Dawkins about this. One of the things that disheartens Dawkins is that as the humanist progresses, and as the atheistic impulse has made itself more manifest, the assault on science is more intensive. Because his notion was if you can just rid yourself of the superstitions of the past, everyone would become like hydrated. Let's say Newton, Bacon, Descartes. It's like, no, it turns out that when you destabilize the underlying story, everybody becomes a narcissistic, immature psychopath, and they don't make good scientists. And like the evidence for that is kind of stark. Because I'm sure you've observed, like I've observed, that over the last 20 years, the scientific enterprise has become a lot less reliable than it was.
Well, for a number of reasons. I mean, one of the primary ones, in my opinion, and I'm familiar with the scientific community, is that a lot of science is built on lineages, and who your advisors were and so forth. It relates to funding, etc. It used to be that the primary value and across the lineages was to seek out new. I tell a lot of stories that would take up hours about great advisors telling their students to move in arbitrary ways that sound like they I'm going to demolish you, but instead, what they're doing new adventures of responsibility. But instead, what's happening is 95% of the scientists in a given subfield all work on similar problems, and each other, validate each other, fund each other, and as a consequence, there are a lot of untouched problems that will hopefully at someday be investigated. The other consequence is that this debacle within the field of Alzheimer's and dementia, where one laboratory fudges data, and you kind of wonder if, I mean, that's not my subfield. I step backward. How the hell does this progress for 15 years? This is real! The Emperor has no clothes. This is real power!
Only 60 seconds left.
Falsified. People knew. So what that means is that it's like bad family values passed on through generations. I mean, I do think these are genuine people along the line, but yes, and the careerist aspect of it.
Well, let's think about that critically. It's like science is a very weird endeavor because in order to actually be a scientist, you have to put discovering that you're wrong before demonstrating that you're right, and that's hard on your career.
Us against the world.
If you play that way, you look at chaos, but that's going to take not
Final 10 seconds.
It's not at all surprising that people would subvert an enterprise that difficult to the narrow demands of career investment. It's exactly what we expect, unless there was a
You'll have to keep
stunningly
fighting until we have a winner.
powerful countervailing force. And that force was powerful enough, let's say, from 1550 to
This is a nice spot.
1980, so that the science worked. That's a short period of time. That's only happened once. And we don't know what conditions had to be
This
placed
is
for people to
real
actually
firepower.
serious prior to seriously, that's what the serious scientist does. And so it's not surprising.
This is real firepower.
Historical norm. So they go, what are the preconditions that have to take place as narrative foundation for there to be at least something over there prior to truth?
I think one needs to reward true adventure, taking on novel. And, you know, these days it's so hard for scientists that there are huge sets of untapped problems. The challenge for them is it's difficult to get funding to take on things that are truly new. There's a lot of discussion these days about challenges with the NIH, et cetera. I think the biggest challenge, regardless of the size of the budget, which is
Time to
also
switch
an
things
issue
up,
that needs to be dealt with
including
and
which
where it's
side
spent,
you're on.
is that we tend to reward science that's
Who are
already
you
completed,
calling
that
a
fits with the
raccoon,
current
huh?
narrative,
The right
and
heroes
it's
could make
very
all the
incremental. They
difference.
reward incremental science, whereas great science comes through taking great risk and people, like you said, holding the truth above all else and being willing to stake their careers on it. And we need to actually reward
Open your
failure
eyes.
if it involved
Reality is
effort to
but an
solve things
illusion.
correctly. In other words,
Right.
give young scientists funding and encourage them to go after novel problems and understand that most of them will
Who are
fail.
you calling a
And
raccoon,
that
huh?
doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be exited out of the university, give them a new novel problem to tackle. Problem is, there's so much pressure, and you know, because you're a university professor, I know, in order to reach tenure, you need to reduce the entropy as much as possible. In any event, without going down that path too
be
far,
coming in 30
I
seconds.
now
Stay
understand
strong.
why you're saying that science has to invoke story. That
It
makes
has to
sense.
be embedded.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Otherwise, well, science is the
Don't got a
handmaiden of
raccoon
some
joke
story.
like everyone else?
There's no way around that because motivation is the handmaiden of some story. And so the motivational framework has to be put in place accurately, and the motivational framework for scientific inquiry is
The
very
battle starts
stringent.
in 5,
Truth above
4,
all.
3,
Right, so if you
2,
stake your whole
1.
goddamn career on a particular
You have to stop
hypothesis
them
and you
from
run
securing the
critical
mission
study,
area.
and it turns out that the reason you're
We can
famous
pull it
is
off.
invalid,
I've been in worse
you have to
gangs.
publish that. Why the hell would you do that? Right, and the answer has to be because you hold the truth in relationship to human flourishing higher than the integrity of your own, even your own self-valuation. Oh man, that's a very difficult thing to establish. Now, you can do that with just science.
More dangerous?
Help them understand that as a medium to long-term gain, there's nothing better than pursuing a and so that's worth the risk. It's worth the risk because
I can heal you.
tactical successful. It's unlikely, like it's unlikely to be a
patch you up.
successful entrepreneur. But if you get it right, you hit the mother. And you don't want to falsify your data because you want to spend your whole life pursuing something that doesn't exist. Because you will talk yourself into believing that false informations are true, and then you warp the whole field.
This is real firepower!
But you can instill love students. But you have to believe that's a story too. You have to believe that the truth is
Fantastic!
serve
Things
truth.
are gonna be
It's the best
different this
long-term strategy.
This is a
Best
nice
adventure.
spot.
That's a good thing to know too. It's the best adventure.
Hurricane
So I made a triumvirate of fame, responsibility, and adventure, saying they're the same thing. I figured it out.
Patch here.
Because
I'll patch you up. Don't mind me.
if you
How much should I down?
say vow, follow the path,
Against the world!
let go of it. Right now, if I wanted to
Tremble before Baal!
craft my strategy, priority, and then I would tilt
Those guys are about to shoot at us.
that in, and I could be more or less sophisticated with that. Or I could just say, we're going to follow the thread wherever it goes, and I'm going to accept the outcome. And I'm going to presume that the outcome is the best outcome that it possibly could be, even if I don't see why. Okay, why is that an adventure? Because if I let go of my predetermined goal, I don't know what's going to happen.
Things are gonna be different this time.
And that's exciting.
This is a
Because you
nice
don't
spot.
know. Well, that's the essence of adventure. It's like you're bounding over the uncharted sea,
ready?
let's say, and you don't know what's going to happen next. Well, why would you exchange that for like a kind of banal predictability? Well, to build your career, just... I mean, I understand why, but you're foregoing what's truly valuable for something that's secondary, something that's secure. That's what better to have an adventure. Why the hell did you do that?
What was indulgent yet for what was truly generous in service to something.
And dangerous. Like, he ends up as a warrior. At one point, he has to raise an army to rescue his nephew from the hands of tyrants. But it turns out that
Final
that's
score.
what he wants.
1, 2, 2.
He wants all the adventures of life to be thrown at him. And that is what everyone wants. And I think that is, you know, the idea that
Well, you can't
you
expect
go watch the
them all.
Lord of the Rings, for example, in The Hobbit, you're seeing the characterization of human personality dramatized, obviously. And that's like a truism. But you have to think about what that means. It's like The Hobbit is Abraham. It's exactly the same story. And that story is the story of that's the genuine identity of the individual. And the promise is that if you aim up and you live in the spirit of the truth, you'll have the redemptive adventure of your life. And that'll be of such significance that it'll justify the suffering that's intrinsic to life. And I think that's right. I mean, when you look at your own life, I mean,
Which hero do you think you
you're on
want
an
to be today?
adventure. You have this podcast. It's ridiculously successful, right? In a way that I'm sure you couldn't have imagined. What,
No.
How long? 5 years ago?
Yeah, we are about to hit the end of 4
I will
years.
bring
in a couple
peace
weeks.
to this
We
universe,
launched in January
no matter the
2021.
cost.
No premonition.
Now,
could
who
have
am I
seen
gonna
this.
banish from this
I had
match?
no concept that it would become what it's become.
Right. Okay. And so what's the existential consequence of that? Like, you know, I mean, everyone's life is rife with the possibility of suffering, and now you have something exciting and generative to do. Why is that working? I mean, existentially, why does that work?
You know, people will ask me, what's next? Where are you headed? And I always just say, you know, like on Friday, I'm talking to Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
and I'm focused on that all week long. And next week, I'm recording a solo podcast about whatever it happens to be. I just believe that's setting my sights on the proximate.
Yeah.
And I just believe in, I know my deep love of finding, organizing, and disseminating information that I hope will be useful to people.
Okay, so
and
why?
that's it. That's
okay,
what guide,
so-
that's the
great.
driving force behind all of it. really.
Okay, so great. So I would say I don't think that proclamation I don't think is any different.
The right heroes can
any
make
different
all
from
the
the
difference.
notion of identity with the redeeming word. That's the same idea, because you said generating ideas, right? Information, and disseminating, right? So that's like
Who are you
it's
calling a
valid
raccoon,
inquiry
huh?
and dissemination of the consequences. Okay, your claim is that that's highly intrinsically motivated.
Oh yeah.
Right. Okay. So then,
I delight in it. It's hard sometimes. I mean,
I will
was
bring
trying read
peace
a
to
really
this
difficult
universe,
paper yesterday.
no
It's
matter the
hard,
cost.
but it feels so.
okay. So then we might say, well, what's the basis for that intrinsic pleasure? Think about that biologically. Well,
golden god.
you could imagine it
I am
as
simply a man who will bring
manifestation
peace to
of
this
the
universe, no matter the cost.
instinct that integrates.
Stay strong.
Right? It integrates you across time. It integrates you with other people across time. Right? And there's a marker for that. Why wouldn't you find your? How could it be otherwise than you would find your deepest satisfaction in pursuing the course of action that integrates you psychologically and integrates other people socially? Like, that would assume
battle
that there's
starts
a
in 5,
concordance between your
4,
deepest self-interest
3,
and the interest of
2,
your society. And
1.
it better be that way, because otherwise you couldn't thrive as an
You need to
individual
stop
in
that
society.
vehicle in its tracks.
So it better be that way. And we've been doing this for a very long time as humans, so why we wouldn't have an instinct to mark that pathway. And of course we find our deepest satisfaction. I mean, I feel once you see these issues that light, they become, I think, painfully obvious. So it's because the contrary hypothesis is absurd. It's like you're going to find deep satisfaction when rejecting knowledge, and if you do happen to stumble across a nugget, you're going to hoard it for yourself. Right, exactly. It's laughing. It's clearly laughing. No one believes it.
Earlier, we were talking about operationalizing the effort, the call to move from potential chaos. It starts with organizing one's physical space.
There's still a chance
If we were to, extend the rings of the bullseye out a little bit further, for people listening who are trying to figure out, like, where do they receive that?
They hit checkpoint. Now might be a good time to stop them.
So responsibility and adventure being perhaps the compass through which we can navigate there. So they think like, well, where can they grab a hold of their responsibility and then as a consequence of doing that, engage in adventure and have an impact that is good for them and good for them.
Maximum pulse!
I think there's very practical answers to those questions. So, two of the highest areas is calling and conscience. And you could think about those. As integrated components. So imagine the path forward. Your negative emotion tells you when you're deviating from the path, and your positive emotion tells you when you're progressing along the pathway. Okay, now imagine that there's a voice of your integrated positive emotion, and there's a voice of your integrated negative emotion. Calling, that's what fills you with enthusiasm. Now, Luger, that's Theos, right? Theos, that's God. Calling,
might be a good time to stop
conscience.
them.
Okay, so now that beckons you forward. So how do you find that? Some things bother you. Those are your problems. And you might think, I don't want to have any problems. No, you've got
Maximum pulse!
You can tell that because those things bother you. That's your conscience calling you to your destiny. Those problems, okay? Calling. There's some things that interest you. Right? And you don't get to pick them exactly. They just sort of make themselves manifest, like the burning bush did to Moses. That's an example of a symbolic representation of calling. That's the dynamism between calling and conscience orients people upwards. Right? That's the pillar of flame and the pillar of darkness that guides the Israelites across the desert.
This is real firepower!
Yeah. Conscience provides discipline.
It's the grand finale.
So you can see that some things. You ask yourself, what bothers you about it? Okay, now you have a domain.
The god of thunder!
Fine.
By the eye of Agamotto!
Pick some of the things you could fix. That's we talk about that. Make your goddamn bed in the
Don't
morning.
give them
You could
another
do that.
inch.
And it's like you see people, their lives are so chaotic. Like they're living environment, and every single bit of it is a catastrophic mess. Sometimes multiple generations deep. It's just chaos. Where do you start
The
dealing
current
with chaos?
score is
Wherever you can.
0.
Put something in order
3.
by your own standards of order,
Time to switch things
and then
up,
see what happens. Because
including
what'll
which
happen
side
is
you're
now you
on.
got a little corner of
Who are you
order.
calling a raccoon?
And now you're a little
You'll
more
need a
well
top-notch
situated.
team
Then you'll
to
be able
win
to see
this one.
what's the next step. And you might think, well, it looks hopeless because there's just chaos everywhere. It's like, it's okay because the process is exponential. So even if you start nowhere, if you keep doubling, you're going to get somewhere and faster than you think. And well, the same thing applies when you're plummeting into the abyss.
The degenerative stuff. A colleague of mine who's
Round
a
2.
geneticist said, it takes many
Some of my best
generations
friends are
to
crooks
evolve
and
a species.
villains.
It doesn't take very many to devolve a
Yeah.
species. Negative mutations can build on another and crash a species very, very fast. I think our psyche is similar in that
30
way.
seconds
Well,
before
that's
you
an
attack.
entropic
Get
problem.
ready.
There's way more ways to make something complex worse than there are to make it better. Right. That's why it's a straight and narrow path.
My father came to this country from Argentina, and he grew up in a lot of, surrounded by a lot of political chaos. Came to the country, became a physicist, probably because he likes order. He's a very orderly guy. And it was probably in the early 90s.
The battle
that
starts
we
in
went,
5,
I was born in 75,
4,
so probably, yeah, early
3,
90s, that we went to a
2,
movie theater
1.
together to see a movie. And he said it as we were
Help
walking
get
in.
that vehicle to its destination.
What? He said, this is the beginning of the end. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we're regenerating the society. And I said, why? He said, there are people here in their pajamas. Right. And obviously they weren't in their pajamas, but they come in kind of like bathroom slippers. And they weren't slovenly, but they weren't taking care of themselves. They didn't care what other people thought, right?
They were
didn't care.
making a public display of their lack of care. Right, yes.
Exactly.
That's a narcissistic aspect too. Yes, yeah, he's right about that.
Yeah, and I thought at the time like he's being judgmental.
Yeah.
I was a teen, right? He's being judgmental, etc. But you know, I would say from 1990 until fairly recently, hopefully things are shifting for the better now. But there has seemed to be it's kind of chaos out there. Now, I think it's wonderful that people can express themselves, like wearing clothes that they feel represent them, etc. But this wasn't that. This was a lack of it.
I am a stranger.
The vocation of voluntary chaos, that's what degeneration into a
This is real firepower! This is real
You're not cool. You're just useless. And you're covering the uselessness with a veneer of
God of thunder! Maximum pulse!
Like if people want to deviate in the manner they present themselves in dress, and they're doing that because they have an inspiration or a purpose, then that's a treatment. Just being so cool you don't care. And that's not cool. There's nothing about that that's cool. And you know, you might say, I mean, you have this sense when you're a kid until you have this overreaction.
This operation at all.
Yeah, well,
Slow the exploding plasma.
and he came from a place that had gone through a fair number of very rough times. And so he could have been perfectly accurate in what he saw. Highly
Let
likely.
the darkness
That's another
take
example
them.
of the center disintegrating. Right?
Where do you think we are now in the United States? I think in terms of how we hold and represent order versus chaos. I mean, we were talking about some of the, this social media post recently. We just had a public display of an assassination. Maybe, I hadn't intended on going there, but I think it's worth talking about. It's weird. I got pulled into this through tangential reasons. This Luigi Mangione last tweet was
By the eye of Agamotto!
Jonathan Haidt. And some media outlets tried to make something of that. But clearly he was very smart. Clearly he had a forethought to
Only
it.
60 seconds left.
3D printed this gun, it seems. It is all alleged. He seems to be pointing in that direction. He seems to not want the police to go investigate anybody else, because he claims there's no one else after him, etc. He clearly was trying to make a statement, but the statement was insurance statements about
is real
insurance system, sort of anti-establishment because of his affinity for Kaczynski Unabomber bombings, but at the same time, he didn't really seem to fall into kind of left-leaning and right-leaning politics squarely. He was kind of all over the place. So if you're I think there's some schizophrenic or schizophrenic type organization there in his head, or lack of organization. I mean, what are we to make of this? And we had to see somebody assassinated, but shot in the back.
Disorder.
I unleash the
But
Vishanti's
he was
Final
quite
score,
successful
0,
academically.
2,
Like the typical
3.
pattern for something like schizophrenic dissolution is very, very much difficult in maintaining. So disciplined,
Well, you
striving,
can't expect to win
highly
all.
intellectual atmosphere.
He was a valedictorian. He was
Yeah.
school,
So
graduated.
I think more Luciferian grandiosity, and the intellect is very prone to that. The archetypal representation of the intellect that overreaches is Lucifer, right? God's highest angel gone most catastrophically wrong, which means that the best thing in its place is the worst thing on the top. That happens with sexuality. It can happen with aggression. It certainly happens with the intellect. And so I think he's a worshiper of his own intellect and believed that he was the guy who could make the decision, even of life and death, which means he took onto himself the role of ultimate judge. And that's what the kid who shot up Columbine did too, and said in his own writings. He's the judge. And that's like narcissistic beyond comprehension. And the fact that he's being celebrated, well, that's an echo of that moralizing narcissism that's deeply embedded in our culture, deeply embedded. And so, yeah, it's very ugly. It's very ugly. I see. So we're going to, what? We're now vigilantes in relationship to the corporate world. Judge, jury, and executioner. And the reason we've taken on that role is because we, unlike, let's say, the people who run healthcare enterprises, we truly care for the sick and oppressed. It's like, do you now? Do you now?
Yeah,
There's so much moralizing in our culture. It's really beyond belief.
I was going to say, all these CEOs now are going to need personal security. That's hardly going to, cause them to adjust their, premiums or something downward. I mean, I think as people get more scared, they tend to, shore up, they tend to double down. I mean, earlier we were talking about action at a distance. I mean, clearly, this Mangione guy is aware of action
route
at
to high
a distance.
status. So, ignored or notorious? There's a hard choice for young men. They'll pick notorious. Many of them will. And no wonder, because status is everything.
And it's hard to do good things over long periods of time.
Right?
It's
That
not hard to
requires-
be good. It's just hard to do. It's hard to do good things. It's hard to do big things. I mean, I think that's one reason why I'm very happy that Elon is being celebrated. You don't have to agree with him politically, but the rockets going, the idea of going to Mars, trying to make sure that our species replaces itself. These are big, important endeavors. I mean, the reason.
Well, and he can clearly do them. I mean, he's
Neuralink.
He's been insanely successful doing 5 impossible things simultaneously. Right, that's
Who
not
do you
fluke.
think you want to be today?
Right, once, probably not.
I will
fluke
bring
even
peace
once,
to
but,
this
you know,
universe,
the
no matter the
probability that
cost.
it's fluke once is higher. 5 times? No, that's the reputation. Right, and so
Now,
he's a
who am I
from
gonna
first
banish from
principles
this
sort of guy.
match?
So yeah, I wouldn't bet against Elon Musk. So, and that is independent of his political stance. And is it difficult to do good things?
No, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard
Yes.
to do long-term good things because they're long-term. That's what I was trying to say.
Right, but it's also intensely, the thing is, it's also, this is that, back to that issue of the relationship between responsibility and adventure. It's like, if the aim is true, the voyage is worthwhile. And so, and that happens right away. Like, you know, you're very successful with your podcast, but my suspicions are you've deeply enjoyed it since its onset. Well, well, that means that some of your pleasure is satiation related. You've become successful, but if that was your aim, you would have failed as a podcaster. Because
Definitely.
a podcast,
I definitely would have failed.
Oh,
Pick your
definitely.
hero.
Right.
Oh, absolutely,
Or
100%.
villain.
Because it wasn't the
Joking.
pursuit of pleasure per se. It's sort of like the difference between, you know, is it easier to be the class clown or top of the class? It's just much easier to be the class clown. All you have to do is
I will
crack
bring-
10
Boy, you
jokes, one of
calling
them
a
hits,
raccoon,
you know,
huh?
and
I will
you're
bring
safe
peace to this
but you're
universe,
actually
no matter the
dissolving
cost.
as you go.
Right. Well, that's the prioritization of the short term over the long run. I mean,
Who you calling a raccoon, huh?
appropriate example because he's sort of like the archetype of the successful podcaster. It's like, what's Joe doing? Well, he's doing what he's always done. He sits down
We
with his
guard the
producer,
galaxy,
one guy,
sure.
and
But
he
sometimes
talks
we
to
take
people he
stuff
wants to
other
talk to
people
about
are
things he
guarding.
wants to talk to them about. That's the whole thing. The whole, and
30
it's,
seconds before you
you know,
attack.
the left,
Get ready.
the lefties who refused to talk to people in the podcast world for 10 years are now proclaiming to everyone who listens that they should have built their own,
Face for what you
you know,
have done to
alternative
Asgard.
media apparatus, and they could have participated in the one that exists now at any time had they shown the least proclivity to do so.
battle
It's
starts
not
in
such an
5,
easy thing to build
4,
because
3,
it wasn't
2,
something that Joe
1.
built. It was
All you
something
need to
that
do is
happened
capture the
around him
mission
as a
area.
consequence of
Got it?
the nature of his pursuit. And that's the case for virtually all the successful podcasters.
I think people forget how Joe's podcast started. you might know this story. I'll keep it brief, but he was a comedian in a comedy store. He had done some television roles of that sort, but and people can find this online. The videos are on YouTube where a comedian was stealing Ari Shaffir's jokes. So Joe got up on stage and said, "There's some ethics in comedy. People can buy jokes, but you don't steal jokes. And there's an etiquette as well." So apparently he confronted this guy in front of the audience and said, "You're stealing these jokes." And I challenged him, and Joe said no. Like Joe stood up in the name of justice. And my understanding, if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that Joe was then banished from that particular comedy club. So what did he do? He went home, popped open his laptop, and he and Brian Redband and a few other folks started what eventually became the Joe Rogan. It came out of an impulse to stand up for the truth, which I think is an important thing for people to understand, because it helps you understand. And I think and he doesn't claim to always be right, but his pursuit of the truth has been a driving force.
He claims consistently to not be sufficiently right.
This is real firepower! This is real firepower! Orange hands! Maximum! Again!
He's genuinely curious.
Absolutely.
I mean, you said it.
Musk himself said, when I interviewed him, he talked about a terrible existential crisis that he had when he was 13, 14, which is not atypical of, people with outstanding intellects, let's say. And he resolved that by recognizing that the quest is the source of being. And so he took it upon himself to confront difficult problems and try to solve them. And he found that sufficiently gratifying, so his existential crisis resolved. That's very much the same pattern that Rogan is exemplifying. And you can see what impact it has on the public. I was talking to some of your staff members before this podcast about your lectures. So you're in the weird position where 5,000 people come and listen to a biologist lecture spontaneously for what, 90 minutes? Like, what the hell? Well, that's just an indication of how compelled people are by anything approximating a genuine quest. It doesn't even matter the direction.
You're welcome.
It matters the commitment and that capacity to explore and transmit. And that is a manifestation of the word that redeems.
I love this idea of what you just said, that it doesn't even so much matter the direction as much as the commitment. A colleague of mine at Stanford who I respect tremendously, Anna Lemke, who wrote the book Dopamine Nation. She's the head of our dual diagnosis center. She's the
This is real firepower!
Dopamine into the public discussion over the last few years. She initially talked about how thinking about
This is real
Maximum pulse!
leave us below baseline dopamine, and then people will engage in more of the behavior drive.
Us against the world!
I was talking to her about how people get sober, and the conversation turned to how do young people find their purpose. It was very interesting. She said, let's talk about finding purpose. Everyone nowadays wants to know what their purpose is. And she said, the way you find your purpose is by going out onto your front lawn and seeing if the leaves need to be pulled. Sounds familiar, right? You find purpose by figuring out how you can be of use at progressively larger and larger spheres away from yourself. And in doing that, you start to hear the calling and you find your purpose. And it, as you said,
Or it reveals itself.
it reveals
the same thing.
So I think you two would enjoy a conversation at some point.
Well, this is an important thing to return to. First, Jacob in the Old Testament verse, he eventually becomes Israel. And so that's his name. Israel is we who wrestle with God. Now, Jacob is a bad guy when the story starts. And he leaves his home and the perverse influence of his mother
Collecting
and his
cosmic energy.
criminal betraying past behind. And the son
Keep fighting until we have a winner.
came up. And that night, he makes an altar and makes a sacrifice. And that night he has a dream that scares him that he struck the head, which is now what he's walking up. And so he finds his purpose. He finds his adventure as a consequence of his decision to be better. Okay, so now you want to find your purpose. Okay. First thing you have to do, you have to review how wretched and miserable you actually are. And you have to face that. And then you have to think,
Just
I'd
saying.
rather
There's
not
nothing
have
I
that.
can't fix.
And it has to be
Armor
true.
patch here.
And then you have to
Pay
aim
up.
up. Now, you don't know what that means because, like, you're pretty scattered and dissolute, but at least you got the damn intent in mind. And then you have to be willing
30
to make the
seconds before you
sacrifice.
attack. Get ready.
Right, along the way. Okay, then what happens? Well, then
You are not
the
as
pathway
human
will
as you
reveal
look,
itself
are
to
you?
you in increments. Calling? Is there something around here that I could fix, that I would fix? That's a great question. Is there something at hand that I could fix, that I would fix? It might be something low, especially when you first get going. You're not
battle
good
starts
for
in
anything.
5,
So you might have
4,
to start with something
3,
trivial, but it doesn't
2,
matter. 'Cause you
1.
start getting better. Is there
All you
something
need to
that
do is
bothers
capture the
me
mission
that's
area.
conscious that
Got
I
it?
could set right in some small way?
I like hanging
Well,
around
that's there for
because he
everyone,
gets me.
right? In the midst of the most catastrophic mess, that pathway, you might even say, look, the more mess around you, the more unstructured possibility you have at hand. And it's true. You know, it's like, I'm not trying to be Paul Anna.
Armed
I know
and dangerous.
how difficult it is, but it is the case that the more mess at hand that you can see, the more opportunity is there.
This is real
You can see what
firepower.
happens. Cleaning it up. So do it. See what happens. That's the adventure. It's going to happen. In my class,
Watch me
in my Napsabini class, I used to have CD studios as a project. And one of the projects was find something around you, in your neighborhood, wherever, in your family, that isn't set right, and see if you can set it right. Just write down what happened. Well,
I'll patch you up.
one student in particular, he decided his mother had died and the family kind of fragmented. And so he decided he would try to take on the role of mother, you know, be responsible for the household operating. Well, it grew up like that.
You're ready
Imagine,
for
he ran into all sorts of weird resistances, right? Because his family was upset that he was doing what Mom used to do, and like, he just had a tremendously complex adventure as a consequence of his willingness to pursue this. So obviously, because the alternative was that his family was going to fall apart. Like, that's there for everyone. You say, well, my circumstances are so different. Fair enough. So are everybody else's. But that means there's a lot of mess. Fix it.
Whoa. Hold up, team.
That's
Armor patch
ridiculously
here.
entertaining
Pay up.
and unpredictable. And that in itself is a great deal. You have no idea what's going to happen. Just like you didn't know what happened when you started the
more than
podcast.
half of the
Why
mission
you
area.
started.
Keep going.
For me, I felt a compulsion to share what I knew, but
Relay
because
deployed.
during
It
the
ain't
pandemic,
cheap.
everyone was so focused on vaccines and lockdowns that no one was talking about the reality that everyone was facing, including,
ready for
Josh
action.
Gordon, I know him full
Don't mind me.
time, our
Just
director of the National Institutes of Mental Health. Not a single thing out there about, hey folks, if you're going to be indoors this month, get some sunlight in your house, or else you're going to have trouble sleeping. Trouble sleeping equates to mental health issues, stress, uncertainty. My lab was working on ways to regulate stress through deliberate breathing, through other mechanisms. Well, I want people to have tools, zero-cost tools, to deal with their stress.
This is real firepower.
Goes without countering the negative forces that were us, which were social order was disrupted, people were at home. So it was a desire to keep the spiritual. I knew it was and I had a long-standing, growing compulsion that I wanted to talk about neuroscience because it's so.
Oh, I'm gonna get
Right,
some
okay, so it's a
revenge.
logical
That was it. There
extension.
was a lot of energy behind the mission, but then there was a calling. The calling was from hearing about people suffering. It's like, well, of course you're not sleeping enough. I mean, not only are there a million things to worry about right now, people aren't working, etc. but you're not getting sunlight anymore. You need to get outside. You need to, you know, and then there's the whole socialization thing, and whatever people's circumstances, there are things that they could do. And so I felt that calling, and my conscience told me that I have the knowledge. So why would I cloister with it at home? It's like, what good is that? So I just started blabbing on the internet.
Right. Yeah, well, that's a perfect thing. You can think, well, that's a logical extension of your subsidiary calling to be a teacher and professor. You're already a researcher, you're already a professor. You're investing in knowledge. Like, well, it looks like you could do that on a broader scale, and the technology's there. Why not explore that? That's a perfectly reasonable, and you can see the interplay of calling and conscience there. That's a lovely way of characterizing the voice of the divine, which is how it's characterized. Repeated. Elijah's the prophet who appears with Christ transfigured on the mount. Yes, it's Elijah and Moses. Elijah is the first person in history who identifies the divine with conscience. That's his contribution. That's a major psychological revolution. Right? This is real firepower! Transformation in understanding. It's like it's not the storm, it's not the forest fire, it's not the earthquake, it's not the God of nature. He's the originator of the phrase, the still small voice. Right? The notion that your conscience is the voice of the divine, my God, there's virtually no discovery. There's no proposition more revolutionary than that. And so that's why Elijah is a prophet of, primary status. And I just see no reason at all not to take that claim seriously. It's like,